Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of the Weatherman at Image Comics. It's Nathan Fox. Thanks for coming on, Nathan.
My pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
So we're here mostly to talk about the Weatherman, your aforementioned series at Image Comics, but I wanted to start by talking a bit about your background in terms of comic art and how you ended up where you are. I love your art, just full disclosure, but stylistically, I think you're like a bit different than what we normally see on most comic interiors to a degree. I'm curious, like, where that voice came from, and from your bio, it seems this is kind of a line that I found multiple times on bios of yours, but it came from an early addiction to cartoons, commercials, and video games. Like, what were the main things that got you excited about art and telling stories when you first started drawing?
Yeah, I always stumble over this. I really got kind of addicted to comics, to be honest. The first time I actually realized that all I wanted to do was tell stories,
Mm-hmm.
and it was kind of a collection of a ton of things. And I honestly didn't think I'd ever be doing this. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't smart enough. I wasn't fast enough. That kind of stuff. But I mainly because I originally, I was one of those guys that um, was really interested in art, kind of the whole kid thing of growing up and whatnot. And growing up in Houston in the 80s and into the 90s, it was we kind of struggled just like anybody else, I guess. During those years, and art really wasn't. How do I put this? Um, an encouraged means of making a living,
Sure.
I guess. So in terms of that, it was kind of that distant thing that you always kind of dreamed about, you're kind of good at, but time to get everything ready for being an architect or a doctor or something like that. And you know, that's all I really wanted to do, but I was too busy trying to make the soccer team and attempting uh, to woo the opposite sex to really care about it.
Mm-hmm.
But it inevitably I ended up at art school at a really awesome time, uh, and just luckily happened to end up in a class with Jim Mahfood,
Yeah.
who introduced me to Mike Huddleston, who was in the class ahead of me. And then, along the lines, befriending the guys from MK12 and an early Matt Fraction at the same time. So it was a really intense time. And I was there for animation. I really fell in love with Disney.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time I got to school and started meeting these guys, I really had no idea what comics or storytelling or any of that stuff was. I was in an illustration program for animation, learning illustration and how to solve other people's problems. But all I wanted to do was spend time in printmaking, painting, and photo video classes.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know what the hell I was doing, but it was those formative years of just kind of figuring out what was going on because I really had no exposure to what was really out there until kind of the end of high school when it started to become an interest and important to kind of figure out what the hell you're going to do with the rest of your life. And just kind of rush to get in and rush to figure everything out. And along the way, Jim and Mike's bookshelves, especially, in the having them for in the class and in the school and as roommates. I mean, I that was kind of my education and introduction to comics, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
I only really grew up with Calvin and Hobbes and Garfield and Sunday comics, even though I know they were always around. The only comic I ever actually remember reading as a kid was when we were kind of trapped by a hurricane one Fourth of July
Oh, wow.
in LaPorte outside of Galveston,
Mm-hmm.
and my dad and I rushed to. Oh, actually, I have it right here with me. Let me grab it. Real quick. Um, we ended up rushing to go get supplies real quick because we knew we were going to get blocked in because things were already starting to flood.
Mm-hmm.
And I grabbed a double bag back in the day. They still had them rotary stands, and it was a Conan.
Oh,
Uh, yeah, Conan 126.
was it like a Barry
Uh,
Windsor Smith or like a John Buscema or something like that?
it was a Buscema, and I've got it right now, actually. And yeah, I had the Spider-Man. I don't know whose it was, but you know, I don't know, man. Like back in the day, I just wasn't into like big muscles and big tits at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of that style. I really had no introduction to that or early image or any of that stuff, really, to be honest. And I was captivated all night under under my sleeping bag, trying to not have my eardrums blown out by lightning,
Right.
and falling palm trees to just pour over this thing. It blew me away.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea what to do with this or even what it was. And it was like that one night, and like that was it, and I lost it after that. And decades later, I picked it back up because it never left me.
Mm-hmm.
But I never really read it again. I didn't even look it up in college until like after grad school. I found it again. But yeah, I mean, I've all of that kind of just spiraled together, and I got lost for a long time and got heavily into printmaking and attempting to teach myself, what character development and animation was when I kind of pulled myself out of it and trying to figure things out between illustration and animation after undergrad, and eventually got into all kinds of crazy stuff, and just ended up back at grad school and giving it another shot.
Mm-hmm.
And I totally failed at that when I started through gym. I mean, I came here at the School of Visual Arts for my graduate degree in illustration because it was the only storytelling program at the time, and or the closest thing to it. And I was a huge fan of everybody who graduated from here and Marshall and all of that, and kind of started to find my way and get work into editorial illustration. And through Jim, he introduced me to Bob Schreck, who was at DC and in charge of Bat titles at the time, if
Mm-hmm.
memory serves. And Bob was amazing and very, exceedingly generous. Gave me his time, showed him my stuff, and I don't exactly remember the reaction other than he and I laughing out loud for a few minutes, and him like telling me, "Man, I love your stuff, but I can't do a goddamn thing with you. You
Yeah.
you have no idea how to tell a story. Your art is gorgeous. The stuff is fun. You can paint. You're an illustrator, but you really don't know how to do this."
Were you
And
just
I
kind of
was
chaos
just
at that point? Like it was.
Yeah, yeah. It was like I was all over the place. I had everything under the sun in that portfolio I was showing him, and I thought I had curated it enough. I had started to get work in illustration. I was like, this is gonna be great. I'll get some cover work. Maybe I'll get to draw Batman. And it's gonna be awesome. And it came crashing down with Bob's honest and exceedingly blunt critique, which I loved, but I was not ready for.
Mm-hmm.
And before he even left, I really appreciated his time. He really gave me a lot of time, and I ended up meeting a couple other editors while I was there. And it was kind of the start of a really cool like 2 year relationship where I would go work on my own and really start studying and figuring out what the hell this story thing really was.
Mm-hmm.
And, kind of researching like everybody else does on, kind of teaching yourself on your own or, asking and getting feedback and kind of making. And eventually went back and started to get my first jobs, a couple of years later when he kind of gave me a shot. And I honestly think I failed at them miserably, but he and Matt and a few other people there like gave me a chance. It was really great.
Yeah. It's funny because like we're going to talk about this later, but you're currently the head of or the chair of MFA or SVA's MFA Visual Narrative Program. And the phrase like story first is one of the big things that comes up in your write up for the program. And I thought,
Hmm.
it's funny hearing this story and then like, thinking about that now. Like has that focus on story like that, Bob was telling you about and everything like that, has that become like a real core focus on how you learn to guide your art after that? Like is it a big focus in your art?
Uh, yeah, I'm not so. I mean, definitely in the art, but you know, even beyond that, I guess, and just kind of the type of work I want to do, and I mean, it goes everywhere from mindset to preparation and like visual writing, all the way through pages and sketches and research. I mean, it's kind of an entire.
It's like a
It's
mantra
kind of
for everything.
become, yeah, it's kind of become like a universal language and approach to just about everything. And it's kind of amazing how complex, like deliciously complex and ever expanding, this profession, non-profession of storytelling really is. It's insane.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, comics is a labor of love, man. You don't do it, you don't really do it for any other reason other than it's just one of those things. I don't know. It became my personal work.
Yeah.
For years it was, illustration was amazing. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still do it. And I still love it. But man, just being able to create these worlds and kind of connect with an audience and tell a story that means something, and finally start contributing, to kind of, our culture, stories, literature, comics, cartoons. I mean, it's an insane passion and so much work.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I actually I discovered before this that before we started recording everything that you went to school with Jim Mahfood and Mike Huddleston because I was like in my head like both of those artists were people who were almost in like the same family tree as you stylistically, but it's like you kind of all approached it just slightly differently. And I
Yeah.
actually I googled Jim Mahfood and Nathan Fox just to be like, oh, let's see if like he mentions him as an influence in interviews or anything like that. And then it was an interview with Jim where he talked about the fact he went to the Kansas City Art Institute with you and Mike and everything. And I thought that was really fascinating. But so what were the books on Jim and Mike's shelves that got you into comics and like started connecting with it?
Oh man. I don't know that there wasn't anything that wasn't on their shelf. Those guys know so much. I mean, they grew up with everything. I mean, I do know that, and my apologies to anybody who might be a fan of mine that this kills, but I was never really into superheroes. I mean,
Sure.
I loved so much of it, but it was just really hard to connect with a hero. When you look nothing like them and or can really relate to any of those worlds or even grew up with comics really. Um, but in terms of indie comics and artists and styles, oh man, I fell hard. Kent Williams and George Pratt were probably the two largest influences on their shelves that just blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
Jim showed me, Tank Girl and Hellboy and I mean, all kinds of stuff. I think Paul Pope's stuff started coming out, and I got freaked out and stopped reading Paul's stuff for the longest time because I didn't want to become Paul Pope. Um, I mean, and also too, like same thing with when I discovered who was it? Oh my God, there's so many. Like Jordi Bernay.
Yeah.
Um, oh, I'm gonna forget a ton of them. Argentinian artists. Anyway, but yeah, I mean, they had a ton of mainstream stuff, but Jim's taste and Mike's taste were really unique.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the one thing we had always talked about, especially in illustration, and I mean, there were a ton of other guys. One guy that was insanely influential was Paul Briggs,
Mm.
who's now one of the heads of story at Disney. And I was after animation as much as he was, but I we just ended up taking different paths. And he's an amazing animator. But I just that crew in those formative years, they were so diverse and so confident, even though, I mean, we're all struggling trying to figure out what in the world we're doing and who we are and, what our voice is and undergrad and egos are flying and art's all over the place. And, and it was just really, it was a really amazing time, when there was so much up in the air.
Mm-hmm.
The traditional and old school illustration, 60s, 70s, and 80s was still really pervasive, and the 90s were kind of cooking. Tell you how old I am. I was there when Photoshop and Corp Express and all this other stuff started, and
Mm-hmm.
it was just such an insane time, and everything was in transition. And by the time I got to grad school and started applying all that stuff, like contemporary illustration just started taking off. So while I was here, Farrell and James and Tomer, Yuko, Ben Mara, like everybody was really here and like cooking.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just an amazing time in undergrad, and my luck and timing at grad school with the people I was here with. It's just it honestly like luck and timing. Knowing Matt and Ben at MK12 and all those guys, just it had an insane impact. But the thing that always kept coming through, which I only discovered later, was how much narrative and character and story was such a huge part of our conversations.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also too, there's guys like Hector Casanova, and Paul Chatham, and just kind of the experimentation and freedom and just you know willingness to experiment and fail and learn, it was everywhere. And I just got in the habit of learning through failure and making and doing.
Mm-hmm.
That just kind of became the MO and the studio practice. And some crazy happy accidents came through there, and we all kept in touch over time, but things just really started clicking, and it just kept moving.
Yeah. I mean, like that. You're talking about how like what a time that was. I mean, like that crew. I mean, like the Meat House crew at SVA is just like
Hmm.
that was a hell of a lineup. Plus, like the Kansas City crew, that's incredible. But one thing I did want to ask. This is super random, but I know you've done
Yeah.
some like skate deck work, and like I don't know if you ever heard of this game. There was I don't know if you're a video game person, but there was this game in like 2000, like 1999, called like Jet Grind Radio and Jet Set Radio, and like a lot of your stuff and like Jim's and even Mike Huddleston's, like it kind of like stylistically kind of feels evocative of that game to me. And it has like
Oh, really?
it's really based in like street art. It was like cell shading and everything like that. It was this game that came out where
Mm,
you're basically rolling around and having to do graffiti all over the city and then like not get arrested. But it's funny because there's like this like street art aesthetic to it that like kind of is evocative of like some of the work you do. It was that ever an
yeah.
influence, or is that not really entering into the realm of what you do?
Oh man, I mean, even though I never really did it, well, I did it a couple of times, and I should never have attempted to do graffiti whatsoever.
I just imagine I'd be horrified the whole time. It'd be hard to do good work.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but I mean, Jim and Mike were definitely, heavily into it. And this guy named Scoob Lepotsky, who's an amazing musician, sound engineer, and craftsman. I mean, they were deep into it. And I mean, we'd all, I'd tag along and go running with them, and it was a lot of it was really honestly like just cultural discovery on my end.
Yeah.
But it was very inspiring to see the connection between like it literally like backing up and watching. Because I wasn't really um, you know, into getting up or kind of doing anything other than just watching, because it was just fascinating to see these guys move so quick,
Yeah.
and it's such a scale. A lot of times I would just hang back with friends of ours that brought camera equipment and just started filming and hanging out and watching, and just the kind of the dance and the fluidity and the motion and body language of it, like that's what I wanted to capture.
Yeah.
There was something about that I really identified with. I'm sure that's connected to probably the 2 years of jazz I took when I was in middle school, but that's another story for another time. But like motion and the attempt to control chaos, like that became really important, and watching those guys tag, finally standing up and working standing and letting my elbow off the table. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
there's just like so many moments of just like movement and fluidity that, it really, I guess it really just kind of started translating into the marks I was making, the language I was building that kind of turned into where I'm at now.
Yeah. I actually saw Jim do like a live, like create art on this big wall. I live in Anchorage, Alaska, and he came up
Oh,
to
cool.
UAA, University of Alaska Anchorage, and they like paid him to do like a live performance where he just did like the art right in front of everybody, and it was like, spellbinding to watch him work. Like, you were describing like there was like it was like almost like musical in his movements. It was really kind of
Hmm.
astonishing to watch him work. He also had music playing, so it probably is where my head connected, but still.
Yeah.
So, you've done a fair amount of comic work between your work on titles like DMZ, Haunt, Dark Reign, Zodiac, plenty of other things. But it's been a bit between your last interior work and the Weatherman, and I was kind of curious. Like, was that a situation of other opportunities arising, needing a break from comic work, something else, or a little mix of everything?
Well, I mean, it was a little mix of everything, plus teaching and running this program that I
Yeah.
started in 2013. I mean, a lot of it kind of came to that, but at the same time, I mean, honestly, when I got started, it was, I mean, I don't mean to go back to Jim and Mike, but it's just totally true. Seeing them create something that's theirs, and all the other guys that I'd end up meeting and working with, even Brian when he hired me for the first time for,
DMZ.
yeah, for DMZ, and then was it Fight for Tomorrow, that cover that I did
Oh,
before
yeah,
that
yeah.
were, even stuff like that, and just talking to them with the freedom and control and ownership they had. That was something that I always wanted. And even when I got started as a kid, all I wanted to do was be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what I would write or what I would say, but it seemed so amazing to create something like that. And then despite the fact that the English language and I don't get along that well, but the just finding something that was mine was something I always wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And when it came to work for hire, I mean, I'm not really I'm not able to do a monthly book really.
Sure.
With work and freelance and just kind of how my career is structured, it's really hard, and to accomplish that. And it's there's a very big difference between illustration and comics financially. But at the same time, I started to realize like I loved working on other people's stories, but I really had some other things that I wanted to say, and stories that I wanted to tell. So I kind of took a break from work for hire and contracts and kind of not owning anything, and just honestly started writing and doing what I need to here for the program, and just kind of focusing back on story again to try and start writing my own stuff and working in my own mediums, whether that it was still in comics or getting into film or animation or character development, which I started to do for a little while, in small chunks.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jody showed up out of the clear blue.
I was actually going to ask you because, looking at your career, like a lot of the stuff that you've done, not only is it not stuff that you yourself own, but it was also, you kind of always jumped in the middle of arcs or middle of the stories, like DMZ. You jumped in the middle of the story and came back, I think, a couple times.
Hmm.
And then with, Haunt and Dark Reign Zodiac, I guess you did from the beginning, but that's also for hire gig. It just kind of seemed like you never really had a thing that was your own from the start that you could kind of build. And I know you've had some things like that, but this seems a little bit different. Was that a big appeal to you about taking on this project?
Yeah, I mean that was that. Well, at least at the time when Jody contacted me, I mean that was a huge thing that I had started to get the 2 or 3 year comic itch again. And yeah, I mean I Dark Reign and working with Casey was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
I mean that getting that guy to just unleash the chain is amazing.
Yeah.
and Zodiac I was really excited about. But at the end of the day, when it was over, it was, it was just it was over.
Mm-hmm.
And it was I certainly am a fan of finite things and not, I don't want to be on something for 20 or 20 arcs and 300 issues.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I just, coming from illustration, I am familiar with and comfortable with telling all kinds of stories in different ways. I mean, I love telling and creating something new,
Mm-hmm.
as often as possible. I mean, I end up learning more. It expands my own visual vocabulary, and understanding of the world and culture and humanity, um, both good and bad. But I never was a beast of like one thing or working on bodies or canons of work.
Sure.
And also too, I'm just wasn't interested in being bound by any specific genre or medium or style of approach. So everything I did for DMZ had a very specific approach. Dogs of War was totally different. Zodiac was kind of in between those two styles to fit the story correctly. And definitely on Weatherman, I certainly have switched up an awful lot, for that. And some of the things I'm interested in doing next are probably going to be drastically different than what I'm doing now.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so let's get into the Weatherman. For listeners, it's Nathan's new image series with Jody LaHoop, Dave Stewart, Steve Wands, Tom Mueller, and Sebastian Gerner. It's about a weatherman named Nathan Bright on Mars in the distant future who may or may not be responsible for the death of 18 billion people on Earth and all of the intrigue and problems that come with that kind of thing being revealed. Two issues are out. I've read three. I really love it. I think it. I have to admit, I said this to you in an email. It's like it's weird because I was actually at Image Expo when it was announced, yet somehow
Hmm.
it's also much different than what I expected. I think part of it comes from the fact that I guess I'd only read Shirtless Bear Fighter for Jody, so I was like, oh, it'll probably be fairly comical, and it does have amusing parts, but it's actually like really affecting deep sci-fi from you guys. What's the story behind it? And like you said that Jody came to you, like how did you first get involved?
Um, yeah, so Jody just kind of popped up, man. Some of the coolest work and the coolest people I've ever worked with. I mean, honestly, like luck and timing. Um,
Did you know him before that?
Apparently, he called me while he was at Marvel,
Oh.
a couple of times, or maybe one or two times, and we couldn't work on a cover thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't really remember it. I don't think. But it was just a cold call, and I think he introduced himself, and then I kept turning him down, and saying no.
Yeah.
And then he was like, "All right, well, read it first." And I'm like, "Oh, okay, fine." Because I actually really love reading everything. It's really awesome to kind of learn from people who send you stuff out of the clear blue from time to time.
Mm-hmm.
And immediately, as soon as I read the synopsis, something like, honestly, like something in my chest just like hurt.
Mm.
And then I just kept reading, and I read the first issue, and I was like, okay, what, well, is there a second issue?
Mm-hmm.
And then he basically gave me the entire first arc, and I was like, man, I'm sold. Like, I didn't tell him that yet, but I
You had to play hard to
was
get.
like, yeah, I was like, dude, we got to meet. I have so many questions for you,
Right.
and we just started talking, and I mean, there's not a lot that I can reveal about it because it's all connected to what's coming. But I mean, we have a lot in common. We were asking similar questions. We had similar influences, and apparently he had me in mind, from the get go for some crazy reason,
Mm-hmm.
crazy awesome reason. And I was certainly in the right place at the right time, and the questions that the story was asking, really felt like kind of full meal comics, man. Like why and what we kind of do this for, and if I was going to do something, I wanted it to be mine, and and this thing just kind of checked all the man, it just checked all the boxes, and was honestly, this is probably the most fun, crazy, challenging, um, character story driven thing I think I have worked on yet. And every Arc 2 is coming as soon as the program's over,
Mm-hmm.
and I get back to work from teaching full time, and I am both scared shitless and am literally jumping out of my seat and biting at the bit to get back at this thing because I have so many new characters and so many new locations and scenes and drama points to hit that it's I don't know, it's just a um, really exciting new take on some seriously deep meaning topical questions.
Yeah.
Especially now, and it's just I don't know, man. It's inspiring. Jody's not holding back. I certainly am putting everything I've got into it, and we're really trying to use the medium and the mechanics and the story, the story fundamentals, and in a way that we're hoping that the audience feels it as much as we do.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna get into some of like the bigger stuff, and there's like two main things I want to talk about that are like
Yeah,
semi story related. I'm gonna get into those a little bit because I do want to talk about like you came in there. It sounds like Jody already had like the first arc scripted out basically, but like obviously you have to develop this world. This is like what is it like 2745 or something like that? It's way in the future, and it's Mars, and so it's obviously not exactly like our world, but I imagine there's a lot of world building and wholesale creation necessary in the book. Like, how is that part of the gig more challenging or enjoyable for you? Like, is that something you dig when you're digging into a book like this?
yeah. I mean, the only things that I really hate drawing are are crowds.
Uh huh.
I don't know why,
I
but
think every
no, I
artist
mean,
hates that.
yeah, yeah, right. Um, and I can't cheat. Like I have to draw every single one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, no, honestly, like uh, I mean, this is kind of like a love letter, passion to comics as well as world building for both of us. And like Verhoeven and a lot of anime and just sci-fi stuff that we love, that we would love to see, and what our vision of this world is like. I mean, we wanted it to be tangible, full of textures and identifiable enough so that the world can build and exist and support as much as the characters in the story are existing at the same time. And it, we have basically spent over 2 years up until this first issue came out, building all of this stuff, and everything really started to click once we figured out and nailed the personalities and visual voices on page of Nathan and Amanda.
Mm-hmm.
And once that happened, it was awesome. It was like a freight train of craziness.
Yeah.
And everything really just started coming together. So, Jody's passion for food, my passion for architecture and like bullshit comedy, and like it just I don't know, it's a great opportunity to really play around with, I think, a lot of the things that we both love and we would love to read and we would love to see and make.
Yeah.
Um and honestly, like Jody's writing and his scripts are insanely visually delicious. So, a great, easily, this is, as much his as it is mine.
I would say I like the book at least 12% more just because Nathan is so obsessed with noodles and like you guys depict that so well. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's funny because it works out so doubly well because one, it's like one further thing that humanizes Nathan, which is extremely necessary. And two, it's like, it's such a accurate like sci-fi trope that it kind of almost
Mhm.
has to be in there. I love that that's a thing.
Yeah, that's all Jody and my love for a few noodle spots here in New York.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I love that part. It just really adds to the character a whole lot. Can you hold on 1 second? My cat is like trying to like climb up the screen outside the window of my.
Yeah,
He's like
go.
doing some crazy parkour right now. I'm gonna text my wife really quick and be like, can you stop him from doing that? Uh,
Nice. Yeah, go for it.
I think he's given up. I think he doesn't understand the concept of like barricades, and so he's like, whenever he sees me through a window, he's like, I want to be in there, so I'm going to jump in there. Uh,
What is this? What is this crazy miniature jail screen
yeah,
you put up in front of
exactly.
me?
He's like, this is why are you painted? He hates the idea that I would do anything that with my hands that involves not petting him. So it's like if he sees me type on a keyboard, he's just like, you are insulting me with your gestures right now, sir. How dare you? And then he like,
Yeah, this is why I have a dog and not a cat, because otherwise
you would never get anything done.
I would never get anything done. It would be the exact same thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so back on it. I do want to talk about some of the other folk. We're going to get into process here in a second, but I want to talk about some of the folks you're working with on the book. Let's
Hmm.
start with colorist Dave Stewart. You've worked with him before.
Oh,
What
yeah.
makes him someone who is, just so adept at bringing out the best in your work and in the world of the Weatherman?
Uh, oh man, I wish I had an answer to that. I think you're gonna have to talk to Dave. All I know is that you know, well, I mean, I color my own stuff, illustration wise, so I have my own insane approaches to what my color, and kind of like writing,
Right.
and seeing your work come to life in somebody else's hands. Like I adore collaboration, and every colorist that I work with, it's just been insane to see their voice come through. And ever since Pigeons from Hell, like I have been dying to work with Dave
Mm-hmm.
again. And he's just a master at his craft, and there are so many subtle details that he puts in here that I feel like I would have killed to have put that in the layers to send him.
Mm-hmm.
That he's adding as much narratively and story focused as I am with obsessing over every little thing that I'm trying to put in here.
Mm-hmm.
So when once he got on it and sent us a couple of samples, it was just like, damn, this, it's just like this feels good. Like
Mm-hmm.
everybody, we what we really wanted on this was like a team, like everybody who was contributing was actually contributing.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing with Steve, same thing with Tom on design, Steve Wands on letters. And we really wanted to make this, something that wasn't a machine or a factory or a process alone. It was just kind of one of those things that just kind of clicked.
Mm-hmm.
And it certainly took a while to develop. And just having Dave on this and really asking him to do his thing, and make decisions based off of how he's reacting to the art and the story. It's a lot of this, honestly, is just Dave like doing his thing, man. There's basic instruction on color for characters that we kind of had already,
Mm-hmm.
and then he's building the world, man.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that I thought was really interesting about it, because I know you have colored yourself in the past, and in like people don't really think about color as storytelling, but it's like such an emotional guide to us, and
Mm,
and it's like it's so important for that. And I imagine that a big part of like finding the right colors for you is basically finding somebody that you trust to do all this, to be able to like evoke those feelings. And Dave, I mean, I actually once joked that they should just name the Eisner Award for best coloring after Dave, because it would be easier than just giving it to him every year. Then somebody else would have a chance. And so, like, if you're gonna get somebody to do it, Dave seems like a pretty good fit.
yeah, yeah, definitely. No, he's a master at his craft, man. He's something else to work with. And just like you said, I mean, when it comes to narrative color, he's directing the viewer's eye and really setting atmosphere, mood, and tone. As much as I'm trying to set it up, compositionally and in, in multiple layers.
Mm-hmm. I do love that you guys had some time on this, so it was like you could all like collaborate, you and Steve, Tom, everybody, to like make sure that
Mhm.
this book is cohesive. Because like I think that's one of the things with sci-fi stories in general is like if certain elements feel out of place, it can take you out of the story, and so having that all buttoned up can really make the whole thing feel grounded and real while being kind of insane at the same time.
Yeah, and I don't disagree. And the time that we have had, I mean, some of it's been a little forced. I mean, I Jody had to wait a year before we could really start working on this together,
Mm-hmm.
and then we've been working on it for 2 years now after that. So he's got a ton of writing done. We've been talking about it, living with it, really spending time developing it. Nathan and Amanda was immediate. I think that kind of came really quick, but Nathan went through a lot of changes and then everything kind of built from there. The Disco Queen kind of came through, after a couple of iterations, and then, the cast of characters just started talking.
Mm-hmm.
And, when that started happening, at the beginning of that 2 year stretch, we really kind of realized like the time that we had was valuable,
Mm-hmm.
and we really didn't want to lose that.
Yeah.
So it really kind of came down to having enough time to really consider the story, and there's so many things we've gone back and debated, and he's had better ideas. I've had ideas that have shifted, and changed things and scenes and reordered and edited panels, and the story's just kind of had time to mature over this amount of time, and just kind of really building it up and kind of getting it through.
Yeah. So what is your process like before you hand pages off to Dave? Like, are I actually on top of that? Are you like a traditional guy, digital guy, mix of both? What do you do?
I definitely love to get on paper as much as I can, but due to all the commuting, all of this is digital.
Mm.
Yeah, so I do right now I do a lot of pencils in commute on my trusty iPad Pro,
Mm.
and then just transfer everything to work on Cintiqs in between studios.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean I love working on paper and doing all that, and I basically had to an agreement with myself after a learning curve of what I can and can't do in on a Cintiq.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can't do it in like 5 sec, if I can't do it in 5 seconds like I can on paper, I got to go back to paper.
Yeah. But that is one thing that I never really think of as far as like the advantages of working digitally is like theoretically it's a lot easier to pack around like a Cintiq or an iPad Pro than it is all of your supplies you'll need for traditional art. That is a nice like little I don't know feather or something to work with when you're working on a book like this, especially when you're having to move around.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I mean, there's a ton of research, and just commuting, and doing recruitment travel, and working for the school and working for myself and working on this book. It just made sense to try and find a way to make it manageable. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that kind of goes to the structure we have for how the arcs are going to come out too,
Mm-hmm.
which is another reason why it's not monthly, it's seasonal. So arc one is volume one that's going to end at the end of this year with issue 6, and then starting up next May, volume two starts up, and then volume three the following April.
Mm-hmm.
So that we can maintain that time in kind of cultivating all of that. I can stay ahead. I can stay ahead of far ahead of retailers and solicitation dates, and continue to put that focus on it. And the book will never be late.
Yeah, that's. I mean, I've said this before on the podcast, but it's like I don't really mind books that like have a set schedule. It's like what is going to happen. It may not be monthly, but as long as it's like something you can kind of predict or something like that, that's all that really
Hmm.
matters to me. But no, I mean, I think that is really fantastic, and it gives you time to do the best work. But yeah, so are you guys gonna be just doing like the Weatherman 1 through 5 or 6, and then picking up with 7, or are you going to be doing like a Hellboy type thing where you're kind of naming the arc something different?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're trying to decide on that, but
Sure,
it's always been volume one, two, and three,
sure.
and each arc is definitely unique. I'm dying to tell you, dying to tell you what's going on, but I can't.
Don't.
But yeah, it's I gotta share this with somebody. It's just like, when are you gonna be done? 2020.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I think it's gonna, we know it's gonna be at least 18 issues, possibly a couple of one shots,
Hmm.
depending on backstories and expanding. I mean, we just in conversation, I mean, we've been joking around about tons of characters' backstories.
Yeah.
Already Cade being one of them. If there's ever time, I really want to go back and tell the backstory of him and Fitch.
Hmm.
But the I don't know, the joy of all this is knowing that this again, this, I hate to repeat myself, but the story's coming first,
Yeah.
and really just, really just trying to make the comic that we set out to make, and the book that we set out to do, and just really focus on that, man, and really put something out that we believe in and love.
Hmm. So you brought up character acting a little bit earlier. Now, I did want to highlight that because I feel like you're fantastic at giving life to your characters,
Oh,
especially
thanks.
almost like especially in this book. Like Nathan is like an extremely lively lead. I do want to
Mhm.
tout his hair as particularly fantastic. As somebody who likes to pop his coif, I
Yeah.
appreciate his hair. But he like feels almost like there's a real sense of like motion and life to everything that's happening on the pages. He feels like animated in some ways without feeling over the top. That is, I feel like
Mhm.
that's a tough line. Like it's a tough needle to thread. Like, what's your approach to character acting, and how do you manage to bring characters to life without making them feel like, you know, cartoonish to the point where it turns you off?
Yeah, that's another good question. Um, I had this great conversation with Jose Villarrubia
Mm.
once about acting in comics, and I think it was about the time that the program was really starting, and I mean, we were involved in it. Ben Mara taught one of our character classes along with Lear and Rosen, an actor, and it was about getting into character. And I think it was on one of the last things I did, and I asked him what he thought about the acting and the emotion of what I was doing, and he gave me a great critique, but I wasn't doing it, and or as strongly as it could have been, or what I thought I was doing. So again, like getting really great constructive feedback,
Hmm.
and then just really, really trying to sit down and make sure that um, I'm being a little more true, and know my characters well enough to actually kind of, you know, become them, and know their voice and their movement and their body language, and how they might do that. And when it came to this, like, that was almost immediate,
Hmm.
and an immediate necessity when we first got started. And one of the things that I've been, really, really trying to work hard on, for this series, to some degree, if not the entire degree, just because everything really hangs on who these characters are, and what we're going to put our any of our readers through,
Hmm.
uh, to pull this story off that Jody has written. I I have to do a lot, and I this was something that I really wanted to come through solidly, and I get into character as much as I can. A lot of attributes of Nathan were things that, I wish I had or could be when I was younger.
Hmm.
Is probably a lot in there.
Was that mostly during his broadcast of his actual weatherman job?
No, no, I despise getting up in front of a camera and acting out.
He's so
No, no,
confident
just
at it, though.
I know. Well, that's probably it. It's like the lack of confidence. Like, yes, I'm going to give it to him because I'm not going to do it in front of a camera just yet.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I just, just really focusing on the nuances and the silhouettes and the things that make the characters unique, and identifying how they would really act and really understanding their voice,
Mm-hmm.
became really important. Because we're gonna, some of them we're gonna be with for a couple of pages, and other characters we're gonna be with for a long time. But nobody is safe in this book,
Mm-hmm.
and
You established that very well in the first issue. I do
yeah.
I do want to bring that up because like weirdly I feel like your character acting was best with Nathan's dog Sadie. Like she felt
Mm.
extremely real. And you know that was one of the details I want to talk about. It was hilariously one of the, I have a Patreon, and one of the I always ask people if they want to answer or ask any questions to my guests, and I had a question about whether or not you'd ever pet a dog before. And you have a
Whether
dog.
I'd ever pet a dog before?
I think he was very upset about Sadie. Um,
Gotcha, gotcha.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And so, were you guys? You know, I don't feel like it's a spoiler to say this because you guys talked about it in your very first interview about the book. But you know, Sadie, Nathan's dog, dies in a very tragic fashion in the first issue. Were you guys nervous about the reactions to the fate of said dog?
Yeah, I mean those, I'm I mean I grew up with dogs. I grew up with a collie
Sure.
uh that I loved as a kid and was massive. It was probably probably the size of Sadie, if not bigger. And those were tough scenes to draw, man.
Mm-hmm.
And that that was something that we really we didn't we didn't mess around with those at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like in a lot of situations, like there's always like the you could look at it as like unnecessarily cruel or something like that. But I feel like due to Nathan's like nature, it was a necessary story beat because you needed to really establish his humanity. And I don't know, it is a really interesting situation, if only because it's like it's a really fascinating look at how like people and readers think. It's way more shocking to have one dog die than it is to read about the death of 18 billion people, which is
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, yeah, and I think that that was something that we debated for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean the question was, should we or shouldn't we? I mean the I guess the hype is real, but the dog is not.
Right.
Kind of became the thing. And I mean the Sadie scenes were like really, I mean they were brutal and kind of terrifying to draw. I mean I don't want to do that to anybody, but then in DMZ I mowed down I don't know how many soldiers
Right.
in friendly fire, but we're desensitized to that. And I mean there are moments where Nathan kind of really needs to realize that the life he thought he had was over.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I think cemented moving forward with this and not being unapologetic about it is was kind of twofold. He's accused of doing this thing,
Yeah.
which if you actually think about it is wiping out almost all of humanity except for those left on Mars. And then secondly, his girlfriend is Sadie. It's not Amanda. So when he's attacked and he's freaking out, it's because Sadie was shot and is killed, and it's not Amanda or the fact that she took out this future future battle axe Viking that was there to kill them. He was pissed that somebody took his dog. I mean and then also, I mean, to top all that off, I mean, everybody that's after him, I mean, they're not really concerned with Nathan. I mean, they're concerned with breaking him.
Mm-hmm.
They're concerned with getting to the truth and really trying to find out, what was there. And the same thing with desensitizing, violence begetting violence. It's kind of an endless cycle of kind of moving through and not feeling it ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I mean, this book is going to stare all of that kind of in the face, and we're going to kind of move through it the same way that the readers do together reading it.
Yeah.
And we kind of went through that in the process of making it, and we couldn't take it out. That needed to happen to Nathan in order to have that reflection and realization.
Yeah, I totally agree. I do think that Nathan is like an extremely interesting character, if only because, assuming he is who he's believed to be, you have the question of like how people can bring a man who doesn't know anything about what he may or may not have done to justice, and like is that even justice if he has no idea what's even going on? It's like I don't know. I think that's one of the things that makes it such an interesting story is like there's this ethical quandary at the core of it, and like
Mm.
even like the characters that surround him, like some people like Cross seems to like know resolutely that this is how he should be treated, but like Fitch seemed a little bit more like he was defensive of it almost, and it like it's a really fascinating read because of that.
Yeah, that I think that was one of the things when Jody pitched it, and what was in there in uh, the original pitch and treatment when we first started talking and ended up pitching the book was that, how do you put somebody on trial when consciously it's not them, and but they are going, they're going to have to own up to it and potentially be killed for something that they consciously didn't do. It's an insane thing to be put in, a
Mm-hmm.
position to be put in. And that trying to find the truth of that and see if redemption's even a possibility.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is an insane weight to bear. And that's honestly that's where Sadie came in. And then when it comes to Amanda and Fitch, um, oh, I wonder. Uh,
That came out today or
sh
yesterday, right?
yeah, she has a lot to lose,
Mm-hmm.
and she lost a lot, just like everybody else. But she is not the perfect person for this. She is the only person for this.
Mm-hmm.
In so many ways, and we get to see them kind of go on this journey to to discover the truth together. And she wants to kill him.
Mm-hmm.
She is like everybody else who is done mourning. They want satisfaction. They want immediacy. They want justice. They want all these things in the name of justice. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And at least in this issue, Fitch is basically the only one with his head on straight who can see the big picture and is not reacting to his baser instincts. He's trying to do this for the good of mankind.
Yeah.
And that entire interrogation scene, in as it unfolds until Amanda gets to Fitch's office, when it really unfolds upon her.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's really what we're trying to establish are those larger questions of how and what we really handle when we react to these things.
Yeah. And I don't want to spoil anything, but issue 3 has a very accurate representation, I think, of how other people might react to the news. Um,
Oh my God, I cannot wait for that to come
yeah,
out.
yeah, it's really fantastic. But so I just let's move on from the Weatherman. I just have a few more questions. I wanted to ask about your work in editorial illustration. I don't know how much you're doing that. I mean, it sounds like you have a very full dance card these days. But you've done work for Newsweek, ESPN, the magazine, New Yorker, and more. It's not super similar to interior work. I guess like there is some overlap with cover art in the sense that it's like telling a story with a single image quite often. But what
Mhm.
appealed to you about that work and the unique challenge that offers, or does it even appeal to you?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I kind of mentioned a little bit about it before, but to well, I mean, there's a couple of things. I would love to. When I got started, it was, what is the greatest thing I can do where I get to draw figures, tell stories, make characters, and hopefully make a living if I can do it. And that was editorial illustration
Right.
and freelancing. But the thing that I discovered is that I had a real knack and curiosity for, always have, for video games and editorial commentary, wanting to say something.
Mm-hmm.
Not feeling like I had a voice yet at the time when I first started tackling it in undergrad, and when I first got started after grad school, like actually doing it. and getting paid to play and figure it out. You know, as I was gracefully falling on the way down about how to fly
Mm-hmm.
and swim in editorial waters. But just to be able to to have something to say and contribute and speak to a larger audience, and communicate visually, to people I don't know, and kind of add my art to literature in one way, shape, or form, whether it's editorial commentary or working within a book or on a book cover, or creating characters and working in backgrounds and editorial commercial work for games.
Mm-hmm.
It's just awesome to collaborate and create those cultural elements and visual communications. I've always been fascinated by it, and just being grabbed by it on my own, as a consumer
Mm-hmm.
and a reader. I found it endlessly fascinating, and it wouldn't require that I do one thing. I could talk about all kinds of things, and potentially, if I, which I luckily got fortunate enough to do, is to start to make work about things that I really loved,
Mm-hmm.
and and deal with subject matters and take chances and kind of work within the waters of my own interest.
Mm-hmm.
And communicate in that way was really engaging. And then also too, I mean, it's a great satisfaction and high to see your work in print. It's validation,
Yeah.
and it's just a great accomplishment that once that starts to happen, you just don't want it to stop. So, it kind of became a flexible, on the go freelance, opportunity that took a lot to get where I'm at now, over almost 20 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I love doing it. I love solving other people's problems and creating visual essays. And that's when comics came into it, I kind of slid into it sideways. After I started working in illustration, and the two just started feeding off of each other.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned so much in comics that I started applying to, and visual storytelling and development that I started applying to my illustrations. And also too, that's when the skateboards started to come into play, and those were for little to no money, but insane freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to start creating images and telling my own encapsulated stories on decks that people would ride and grind and fuck up and break. It was great.
Yeah.
And it's just whatever is around me, that I could possibly communicate with. I'm really interested in seeing what I can do, from skateboards to murals to film to just about anything.
Yeah, it seems like they're working in those mediums when there's overlap obviously, but it seems like you could learn a lot from each of them. It's like comics, like you could take that storytelling that you do in there over to the editorial illustration, but I imagine editorial illustration helps you have to think in like a more economical fashion with how you're delivering story, and like I
Hmm.
imagine that's helpful for you.
Yeah, and when definitely when I mentioned one feeding off of the other, I mean, my illustration suddenly had a lot more narrative, content and meaning and story points behind it, and my thumbnails and content got a lot stronger, and weren't so black and white.
Mm-hmm.
And then vice versa, the immediacy and figuring things out on a deadline in a very short period of time, really came into play with comics. I think the challenging thing though was that illustration translating into comics. When I first got started, I wonder how many. I imagine this happened to everybody else, but every panel I started treating as comics.
Mm-hmm.
I started treating as illustration, and it was almost like I was writing a letter to God in every panel. A great example, I guess, is fluorescent black.
Oh yeah.
Versus what I'm doing now. Those. even though it was trying to make the world gritty and oversaturated and busy, I mean, I those things are oversaturated and busy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I was really learning how to figure all that out kind of all at once. But looking back, it's kind of amazing how the two have kind of ironed everything out in order to kind of find my how much communication and
Sure.
how many marks and what economy of line and story I need to get across. So yeah, it's been it definitely has been a give and take, but you know, the cross pollination of all of those mediums has been insanely insightful. I'm dying to get behind a still and motion camera as well in the future because of all of this.
Mm-hmm. So to close, I want to actually ask or talk about your current work as the chair of SVA's MFA Visual Narrative Program, which we talked about a little bit already. I am just kind of
Hmm.
curious, like what you have a lot going on. Like what made you want to teach?
I well, I guess a couple of things. I mean, I for some reason I always wanted to teach. I don't know why. But it was just something I was always interested in. I was really influenced by a lot of the instructors that I had. And I certainly felt like I was given so much, and I felt like I wanted and took and requested so much that it was just great when I started teaching to give back, and it was also a way for me to support illustration when I got started, and then when I got the comics bug, you know, it certainly was a way to make that work,
Mm-hmm.
you know, financially, you know, and starting a family. You know, it having that security and safety there to some degree became really important, and it was honestly it was really satisfying. And the one thing I didn't realize when I started teaching was that I would end up getting more, probably more from the students in both reminders of the fact that you teachers and instructors need to keep practicing what they preach as well as you know, being able to give back at the same time and kind of discovering new insights and ways of seeing things from generation to generation. And when it came to the MFA program, I had been teaching in undergrad back in Kansas City for a while actually, and my teaching philosophy had changed so much that I was bringing so many mediums into the classes that I was teaching to try and really expand what the students were exposed to, and really wanting to teach more full time, and kind of wondering if comics and illustration was still going to be there. That you know, kind of same thing, like luck and opportunity kind of struck, and I found out that the president of SVA was looking for some kind of proposal in a storytelling low residency program. And to me, this was insane because my old man greedy dream, um, dirty little old man dream was to start a program and you know, just kind of contribute and teach, you know, so that I wouldn't have to retire. I'd be able to keep working and yada 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 when I got old,
Mm-hmm.
if I was lucky enough to live that long. And um, then this literally happened in 2011, and I didn't know if that was right or wrong, but it felt like an opportunity I couldn't miss. And if I was going to do it, if I was going to do it while I was working and things were starting to pick up, you know, I honestly I just thought of the craziest thing I could think of that I would go back to school for, and I didn't have a model for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, you know, what would happen if the artist met the author and interdisciplinary storytelling was actually accessible, where filmmakers and comic book artists and illustrators, graphic designers, game makers, you know, people in advertising, like anybody that dealt with narrative, what would happen if they just went to school and had a focus on that
Right.
as both a writer and an artist? And I got insanely excited. And realized that that's what I and peers and eventually the faculty I would hire, I mean, that's what we were all doing on our own. And kind of, teaching and discovering things ourselves, or people went back to school multiple times for it, or had a major and a minor. But that awesome uh, that awesome rich studio environment that are generally focused on one specific direction or another. What would happen if all those people were in that intense rich environment together, and rather than competing for jobs or professional practices or companies or positions, they were really having an intense focus on the love, craft, and language of universal storytelling, so that they could then take that focus in wherever they wanted to take it, in whatever direction they wanted to do, and they would be informed and knowledgeable in how that communicated across mediums. And that's what I pitched, and I was fully expecting to get turned down and to go and try and find another job. I actually turned it in, and I started looking for new teaching gigs outside of Kansas City, because it was as everybody does, it comes in waves, and was struggling again with illustration and trying to get comic work. And then I found out that it got approved, and then it got accredited, almost immediately right after that, and I was literally off and running as the chair of a graduate program that needed to move back to New York in like 6 months.
Wow.
So yeah, so we put it all together. Luckily, I found the most amazing director of operations in the world, who basically makes me look good and runs the program in total.
Yeah.
And with all the faculty we ended up hiring over the years, and the improvements and development they've made, the feedback we've gotten from students about 3 years ago, because it launched in the summer of 2013, and about 3 years ago we found a really solid click, and then the curriculum and story first and everything really started to kind of come together, and it's been an amazing ride ever since. And at least in the world of comics, Bill Cartalopoulos and Jim Rugg,
Oh,
Ben
nice.
Mara, Mark Sable are instructors here. Other people that have worked in and outside of comics, and the comics medium, and other forms of storytelling. I mean, we've got a very interdisciplinary faculty. David Mazzucchelli and Asaf Hanukkah and a few other people were recent mentors, and from the comics field. So it's been an amazing array of filmmakers, photographers, graphic novelists, illustrators, and designers and animators that have kind of come through here. And if anything, it's been great to come and have a place where that there is a space for focusing on nothing but story. And again, same thing. Like I'm discovering and learning so many things from the students and guests, mentors we have, and being able to give back in kind, that I'm getting just as much out of it as they put into it.
Yeah. I mean, I was thinking that you'd probably learn a fair amount, if only because the people who are coming up now, the artists who are coming up now, the people who are trying to tell stories now, are like coming out of like the things that they learn from are just so much different. Like they learn from like they're used to like graphic user interfaces, and they're used to like the way that the internet works, and they're used to like all.
Hmm.
I'm not saying that people of all ages haven't done that, but they grew up on that. They're like that's their world, and I imagine that kind of changes the storytelling a little bit. And like I also think that like that program, that idea you had for like the storytelling and everything, is just it's such a brilliant thing for the way that the world works today. Like everyone likes calling it content, but I mean it's like largely it's
Hmm.
like I've written pieces before where I hand it off and then it gets turned into a video, or it gets turned into a piece of art that goes with it, and it's like there's all these different things you have to do to like integrate into a central story, and it's I don't know, being able to do all of that yourself or being able to approach it that way is pretty essential for storytellers these days.
Yeah, and I mean, the at least with technology, I mean, I'm not sure exactly how old you are, but my equivalent when I was coming up was, we knew how computers operated, we knew what apples were, we knew what Adobe was, and we were teaching old folks, new things. And then, literally dial-up ended, high-speed internet hit, and like the world changed,
Mm-hmm.
and cell phones, like everything just started happening immediately, and the learning curve, the access, the immediacy, but also, even too, I mean, in content, it's amazing how much of this really boils down to what a story really is and what a story isn't,
Mm-hmm.
how much we believe that we're fed, and really seeing the forest for the trees when it comes to what we're really being told and what's really there.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have, if I knew now what if I'd only known then what I knew now, I think my younger self's mind would just explode.
You
Um,
weren't ready for it.
I certainly was not ready for it. And that's another thing too, is that it's amazing to see. It's amazing to see students come through here, and even students in other departments too, and other programs and schools and fields all over the. It's amazing to see that click
Mm-hmm.
that happens once they understand how to communicate to their audience and they don't forget their audience, and are able to design, deliver, compose, and speak to them and with them. And then also too, what happens when and I'm sure anybody can think about this as to how they're reacting to whatever they're reading or watching, especially now on mobile devices and computers and televisions. But when you find yourself doing the work and you're part of the story, that's a thing. That's a thing about books that blew my mind as a kid. Is just I still think about this today. Is like this is totally going to date me, but the first novel I ever read that wasn't required for school, which actually was really late considering how old I am, was Jurassic Park,
Mm.
and Treasure Island, and both books were probably the first two books where I literally cracked to the first page, and then I went to bed at like 2 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no idea where the day went, but I was literally there.
Yeah.
And that type of immersion and connection to a story was mind blowing, and it just started changing everything. And now it's there's such a great opportunity for original content and new voices to do that,
Mm-hmm.
and we certainly need it now more than ever.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know, it's a thing I really hope people and students, and educators and programs, really keep taking to heart, and teaching great story and narrative design, and communication to new generations and new students, so that they are armed, informed, and knowledgeable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, that's wonderful. Perfect place to end, Nathan. That is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about all these, the Weatherman and everything else with me.
Oh, thanks so much, David. I really appreciate it, man. This was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Nathan Fox. You can find him on Twitter at Nathan Foxy and his work in The Weatherman at Image Comics. If you're a fan of the show, check it out on Patreon. If you back it on there, you not only support the show, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and give the show a rating and review while you're at it. You can also find the show on social media. Like it on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or follow me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Kent Heidelman, Philip Sevi, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Poletto, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Michael Garland, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Mike Gillis, Adam Bogert, Xavier Files, Maria Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Dan Guarino, Dan Lee, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Henning Allers, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruto Batista, Abraham Reisman, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, Darren Neely, John Hendrick, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Ryan Mail, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Crystal Hallren, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track outro from the album Volmilch opens and closes the show now. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening and tune in next week for another episode.